Hello, everybody. My name is Teresa Hurley. I'm the Executive Director of the Contra Costa County Bar Association, and I would like to welcome you to this afternoon's MCLE Spectacular program, Embracing Invisible Disabilities, Ending the Silence of Shame. Right now, I'd like to introduce our session sponsor, Michelle Ferber with Ferber Law.
Thank you, Teresa, for the introduction. It is my privilege to be here today as a sponsor for the Contra Costa County Bar Association's MCLE Spectacular. I know as a past board member how hard everyone on the board and in the office worked to make this event possible, and even under these very difficult circumstances. This year has been anything but normal, and we really are grateful and appreciative for all of the support and outreach the association has continued to provide to us, our members, and our community. I am also proud to be the founding managing shareholder of Ferber Law. We are a boutique law firm located in San Ramon. We specialize in employment and business, both litigation in terms of defending all types of employment discrimination, harassment, wage and hour claims, and also advising employers on a regular basis how to comply with laws and to prevent all of those same things like harassment and discrimination in the workplace. If you need assistance or would like more information about what our firm does, feel free to go take a look at our website at www.ferberlaw.com. Thank you again.
Thank you, Michelle and Ferber Law, for your sponsorship and support of the CCCBA in this amazing event. Good afternoon, I am Erica McKenna, member of the Contra Costa County Bar Association Board of Directors and partner at McKenna Brink Seniorati. On behalf of the Contra Costa County Bar Association, I would like to thank you for attending the 26th Annual MCLE Spectacular and this afternoon's session, Embracing Invisible Disabilities, Ending the Silence of Shame, presented by the East County Section and the CCCBA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I hope you had a chance to visit the networking rooms and our sponsors today. Our event and program sponsors are a very important part of the CCCBA community. They make it possible for us to provide events like this. Please support us by supporting them. Please join us at 6 p.m. for the entertainment portion of our program. We are bringing a little fun your way this year with a bit of the Bard, a bit of laughter, and always some magic. It will be lots of fun. Also, tomorrow, we have a great half day planned for you, including our keynote with Congressman Eric Swalwell. I hope to see you all in the morning. If you are having technical difficulties, please have a look in the FAQ tab for troubleshooting tips. I would like to again thank Ferber Law for sponsoring this session. At this time, I will pass the program over to Julianne Giamonna.
Erica. Good afternoon and welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to give you just a brief summary of how this program will proceed. We will be speaking for about an hour. And in the beginning, I have a few PowerPoint slides. I will introduce a panel. Following my presentation, we will be directing some questions to the panel, and then we will have a live Q&A session where we hope that we will have audience participation, feedback, any ideas, stories, or ideas on how to break down the barriers. So let's jump right in. Our first panelist is Sally Noma of Noma Law. And Sally and I met in February at the Women's Lawyers Conference in Sonoma. And we were doing an ice-breaking activity where we had all written down on pieces of paper. We had circles, and we were supposed to write in the circles different identifying views that we felt about ourselves. And then you had to walk around the room and try to find someone, several people. You had about 2 minutes to find one person, and then you shared your circles to see if you had anything in common. And Sally and I bumped into each other towards the end of the icebreaker, actually, and that's how we discovered that we both lived with invisible disabilities. And it was actually one of the very first times that I had discussed that professionally with anyone. And so Sally and I began to talk about our situations and the fact that we didn't speak about it to anyone. And so that began kind of a thought process for both of us. And then the next panelist that I'd like to introduce is Patanisha Davis. And Patanisha and I met last fall through the CCBA, through the East County section. We were planning an event, and I was meeting Patanisha at a restaurant. And I arrived a few minutes before she did. And when I walked in, I noticed that there were ceiling fans that were running in the restaurant. And I cannot be around running ceiling fans. When the motion is a trigger, and it triggers seizure-like symptoms for me. And I usually call the restaurant ahead of time. I usually try to figure it out ahead. I had neglected to do so. And I hardly knew Patanisha at all. I think I had met her like maybe once before this. So immediately I became a little bit concerned about what I was going to tell her. So I didn't say anything. We sat down at the table, and the ceiling fan is twirling in front of me, and I am becoming extremely dizzy, and I can feel that I'm going to become more symptomatic. So I had to tell her, and I said, I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to switch tables. I can't be around ceiling fans. And her response was extremely compassionate and understanding. And again, unbeknownst to me, she disclosed to me at that point that she also lived with an invisible disability. And we began to realize how many more people do not talk about these things, keep it to themselves, and say nothing. So we began to start thinking about what can we do? How can we make people more aware, and how can we get the news out there, basically? So that's Patanisha. And our next panelist is Michelle Ferber, who you just met, and she is going to be speaking as a panelist from the perspective of hiring an individual with an invisible disability, hiring a lawyer like myself with an invisible disability, what that meant for her, what it means for the firm, etc. And our next panelist is Alexandra Saddik, and she's also with Ferber Law, one of our newest additions who we are so appreciative of. Alexandra will be speaking from the point of view of a family member that has another close family member, and I'll let her tell you her story. But her perspective is going to be how it is as a family member to live with someone with an invisible disability. And then, of course, there's me, and I look a little different without my glasses. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so I just have a few slides that I want to just talk a little bit about what an invisible disability is. It's often a disability that is hidden, not immediately apparent. It goes by a lot of different names. Some people use the phrase hidden disability. Some people prefer not to use the word disability and say differing abilities. So everyone has a different expression and a different preference for language. In today's webinar, when we're referring to invisible disability, we're referring to all of those as one. So invisible disabilities include such things as learning disabilities, autoimmune conditions like lupus, multiple sclerosis, anxiety, depression, addiction. These are just a few examples. It's estimated that 1 in 10 people live with an invisible disability, and most people believe that number is underreported. People with some kinds of invisible disabilities are often accused of faking or imagining their disabilities. Part of this is due to plain ignorance, to be frank, but part of it also is due to the nature of an invisible disability, which usually is remitting and relapsing. So on any given day, a person with an invisible disability might be symptom-free or may be experiencing multiple symptoms. The unpredictable nature of an invisible disability is extremely difficult to manage and cope because the person with the invisible disability never really knows from day to day how they're going to feel, and sometimes even from hour to hour. People with invisible disabilities are amazing actresses. Don't let the way they look fool you. They've usually prepared behind the scenes to be able to attend an event. For example, resting, doing nothing for days before to make sure that they will have enough energy on the day of the event so that they can appear healthy and well and normal. Okay, and the next slide. So let's talk about the word ableism. Ableism is a word that many of us may not be familiar. When running spell check, when I was making these slides, I couldn't even get it to come up on my Google. It didn't recognize the name. Ableism is discrimination in favor of able-bodied people. We can see ableism in the structure of our society that excludes people with disabilities. Whether or not it is intentional or not, the way the society is set up, people with disabilities are most of the time excluded without thought. It's also seen on a personal level by those that treat someone with a disability as less than or not equal to. Despite the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Employment and Housing Act here in California, ableism still appears as a socially acceptable form of discrimination. It's particularly prevalent for people with invisible disabilities because as humans, we like to be able to see and understand. If we can't see it, it simply doesn't exist. This is a subject that's close to my heart since I am a person that lives with an invisible disability. I became disabled in 2009 at the height of my law career when I was running my own practice and I had 3 other attorneys working with me. It was a very difficult time for me with a lot of loss and pain. Gradually through the years since then, I've learned to accept my differing abilities, but I'm not going to lie to you, it is a struggle every single day. It's a struggle to fit in the world that I once knew, that I used to fit into, that I no longer do. Because my disability is invisible, I often try to hide my true self to avoid possible judgment or stigma, particularly in the workplace and with clients. It has only been in this past year that I have begun to publicly discuss this in a professional setting. Disability is complicated. Ableism is subtle. It's sinister and dangerous. It's ingrained into our everyday language, the fabric of our life, without us even realizing it. Ableism causes the stigma and the silence surrounding people that cannot function in a way that is expected from society. Next slide, please. Thank you. So how can we remove the barriers? How can we begin to address this issue? We have to rethink the way that we label people with disabilities. Instead of viewing someone as less than, we must begin to see that differing abilities can actually be a plus. We must recognize the innate value of every human being and focus on our common humanity. We have to start a conversation about ableism. We have to use that word. We have to speak it out loud, ableism. So it becomes a common term that people are familiar with. We have to teach people what to say to persons living with invisible disabilities so that we can begin to remove the culture of silence and shame. One of my saddest experiences of being treated differently because of my disability happened in a public place. I had ordered food from a cafeteria-style restaurant and had just retrieved my food and had begun eating. Because my blood does not flow properly, most of the time I have to keep my legs up on a chair to be in a slightly reclined position, which is what I was doing when I was eating my food. Before I knew what was happening, there was a woman standing about 2 feet from me, literally in my face, yelling at me. She was using the F word and telling me how disrespectful I was that I had my feet on a chair. I was so shocked that I just shut down. All I remember is repeatedly apologizing. I was humiliated. And I just kept saying, I'm so sorry. And I took a napkin and I tried to start cleaning the chair where my feet were. And I tried to mumble, I'm so sorry, I have a heart condition, I need to keep my feet up, I don't want to faint. And she just literally kept yelling at me. The thing that struck me the most about this encounter was the restaurant was full of people. Not one person tried to help me. No one stood up and tried to intervene or say anything. I gathered my purse and other items. I began walking out, and a woman came up to me with tears in her eyes and asked me if I was okay. I told her I was. She then said to me, and I will never forget her words, "I'm so sorry I didn't help you. I did not know what to say." In many ways, her words were very healing for me, because I think this is true for most of us. We mean well, but we are often trapped by fear. We must move past this fear to see value in the invisible disability, to be able to usurp this ableism, to believe we are equal in our differences. For people living with an invisible disability, we ourselves have to be our self-advocates. We have to speak out and stop hiding in fear, especially in the workplace. Looking back on the incident I described that happened almost 10 years ago, I see there are so many things I would do differently now, or at least I hope I would do it differently. When the woman started yelling at me about my feet being on the chair, I hope I would say, "Gosh, it seems like you're really angry about my feet being on this chair. I'll make sure that I'm going to clean the chair. I have an invisible disability that affects my heart rate, so I need my feet on the chair because I don't want to pass out." When the other woman came up to me and asked me afterwards if I was okay, I wouldn't have told her yes. I hope that I would say today, thank you for asking me if I'm okay. And honestly, I feel so humiliated and isolated right now. I would then hopefully ask her, are you willing to have a conversation with me? Are you willing to take a couple of minutes out of your day so I can share with you what my invisible disability is like for me and what things would have helped me in that situation? These kinds of responses from me require me to jump through my fear, recognizing that not everyone will respond in a positive way to my invitation. However, to dismantle ableism, we have to speak our truth, no matter what the consequences may be. We will not always get the result we want, particularly in the workplace. Several years ago, I ran into an attorney that I had worked with when I first became disabled. We chatted, caught up on, how the kids were, how life was, etc. And then he said to me, "Oh yeah, by the way, how's that vertigo thing that you were going through?" Or whatever it was. And in that moment, I chose once again to be paralyzed in hurt by what I considered to be dismissive words. Didn't he understand that that vertigo thing had caused me to lose my practice? Didn't he understand that it caused me to lose so many professional relationships, family relationships? Didn't he understand that my vertigo thing was actually disabling, that I struggled every single day to get out of bed in the morning just to stand up? Didn't he understand that I desperately wanted my vertigo thing to vanish so I could fit back into the world I once knew? The answer to all these questions is no. He didn't know any of that, nor should I have expected him to, because I've never talked about it. We don't talk about disabilities. Instead, we've been taught to say nothing, to turn away, to give people their space and privacy. This results in an awkward silence, misunderstanding, confusion, shame, isolation. Now is the time we want to change this conversation. I would like to open it up to our panelists now. Hi, everyone. Hi, Patanisha, Sally, Alexandra. Nice
Hello.
to see you. So I wanted to talk with you a little bit about your own experiences. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Julie.
So first, I wanted to direct a couple of questions to Patanisha and Sally. And my first question for both of you is, can you share with me what is your invisible disability and how has that impacted your legal career? And Patanisha, do you want to start us off?
Sure. And Julie, thank you for putting this together. I'm so happy to be on a panel with such esteemed other women who are being brave enough to talk about their invisible disabilities. So my invisible disability is that I have fibromyalgia, and I recently learned that not only do I have fibromyalgia, but for years I've suffered in silence with trying to figure out what else is going on. So I found out that I have chronic inflammation, and what that is basically my joints are inflamed. I have swelling in my body in different locations that the doctors can't identify. And as a result of the swelling, there are days when I can barely get out of bed. There are days when I can not walk after being seated at a desk or in a seated position or in a position where I'm in bed. I've been laying for a couple of hours. I have a bunch of swelling, and I do not have full use of my hands. So going into a grip position is very difficult for me. It's really had an effect on my career, as you all know, who are attending this event. As attorneys, no matter if you are a solo practitioner or you are an attorney in a law firm, there's no forgiveness for missing court, and there are no real sick days at the courthouse. If you're scheduled for a hearing or a deposition or a trial, you are expected to be at that event. So if I wake up on a really bad day and I have pain in my hands or in my legs, I still have to go at it. I still have to go right up there and perform to the best ability on behalf of my client. So my invisible disability has been difficult because it has been very difficult to explain to opposing counsel or even judges at times that the day is difficult for me and I can't do the same thing that the others are doing.
Thank you, Patanisha. Can you share with us, Sally? And I think you might be on mute.
I joined the panel because I have a generalized anxiety disorder. And actually, when I started my legal career, at that time, I had been misdiagnosed as having bipolar disorder, which is arguably subject to a lot more stigma than generalized anxiety disorder is. I also have never really spoken about having an anxiety disorder publicly. It was actually as a result of getting more involved with women's issues and California women's lawyers. Feeling more empowered as a female litigator made me start to ask myself, why am I not talking about the other parts of myself or what it means to have an anxiety disorder? And I think that's the way that it's impacted my legal career, is coming into the profession, working at a firm where I was the only woman. I felt like I can't add one more strike against me. And yes, being a young woman litigator already felt like a strike, and I already felt all those stereotypes. So I was definitely not going to put myself in a position to show another potential weakness of having an anxiety disorder or anything that would stop me from getting assignments or stop me from fitting in with my bosses or my clients. One of the biggest things that I've been able to do, and I didn't start doing this until I was a shareholder in a firm, so I felt very secure where I was at that point in my career, is just being honest that I'm going to therapy, that I have therapy weekly. That's something I do. And all those years of having to make up excuses for that, now I question why. What is so terrible about saying that I'm doing something for my own mental health? That's been very freeing for me. And now that I have my own firm, it's really important for me to create a culture where differing abilities are seen and understood, and we can talk about what those stereotypes might be and get to know individuals on their own level. So thank you for having me here, Julianne.
Thanks, Sally. And for myself, my invisible disability is a neurocardio condition called dysautonomia. That may be a phrase that you have seen recently in the media. It is becoming, I'll use the word trendy. Unfortunately, it is becoming quite well known as survivors of COVID are experiencing neurological dysfunction following and during their recovery. Dysautonomia is a generalized term for a malfunction of your autonomic nervous system, the portion of your brain that controls all of the automatic functions that you do not think about: blinking eyes, swallowing, digestive. For me, it primarily affects my cardiovascular system. And the way the cardiologist explained it to me is it takes me 4 times the amount of energy to do the same task that it would take someone else. So it's like you're running in place all day long. So the symptoms run just a wide range: nausea, exhaustion, dizziness, fatigue. And so it's a constant for me. It's impacted my career dramatically because of the energy, the inability to function at the stamina that I want to. Unfortunately, about 5 years after my dysautonomia diagnosis, I was diagnosed with stage 1 COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which was quite a shock, as I've never been a smoker and have never been exposed to smoke growing up, other than the normal smoke. So that combination, the shortness of breath from the COPD and the shortness of breath from the neurocardial condition, has made it even more difficult to function each day. I have a regular routine in the morning that I have to go through. The mornings are the worst time. And one important thing is to constantly keep my blood flowing. So to constantly trying to be walking and exercising and those sorts of things. So it dramatically it's impacted my legal career to the point where I had to completely give up my practice, reduce my hours, and it's dramatically affected my personal life as well. So let's move on to our next question for Sally and Patanisha. What would you say is the most difficult part of practicing law with your disability? Sally, you want to lead us?
Yeah, I'll start. I think what's interesting is we're kind of on opposite ends, Julianne, where you're describing a really rare disorder that's not really understood. My disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, I've heard that as many, they don't really know, but as many as 1 in 6 people have generalized anxiety disorder. So it's incredibly common. And so it's really amazing that it's still so incredibly stigmatized, when probably everyone, most of us on this call, know someone who suffers from this disorder or something related to it. So I would say the most difficult part for me in practicing law has been not able to be authentic with who I am, which is so important. For lawyers, especially litigators, we're working around the clock, and a huge part of our identity is our work. And if there's a part of your identity that feels wrong or different, that takes a toll on you after a while, and how you practice, and just how you think of yourself as a professional. I also think that there's a lot of stereotypes of what is a litigator and what a litigator looks like. As I alluded to earlier, it's difficult and it's different for women in this profession to be taken seriously sometimes as litigators. And by adding on something else, like the stereotypes that come along with generalized anxiety disorder, that adds to that stigma. So that's really difficult as well, to try and change the notion of what a litigator looks like and what a litigator does. And that yes, litigators can go to therapy and also show up to court, or whatever the situation is. And I think some people don't really think that that's true. And I'm happy to now be talking about this more, to show that there isn't a single model of what someone with anxiety or anxiety and depression or even bipolar disorder looks like. We're all individuals, and we all have our own unique perspectives. And it's something that you mentioned earlier, Julianne, when you were talking, it was really striking to me about ableism and what it means. But by being more open with something like an anxiety disorder, I thought to myself, oh, well, to Julianne's point, I might have a different perspective on a case. You want to know who sat up worrying about this case all night, 3 nights? This one. Maybe that's, in some way, it's even a strength. So I thought that was really interesting that you pointed out that having different abilities, and in Patanisha talking about the strength it takes to go to court, that creates a different perspective to share with colleagues who maybe they just broke their ankle. You know, if I had a hard time getting to court, I'm going to call Patanisha because she knows every trick, every pill, everything you need to do to go to court. So we're increasing ourselves as a bar and as a firm by sharing with each other.
Thanks, Sally. For me, the answer to that question is has multiple answers. For me, one of the most difficult things is the isolation that I experience because I do need to work remotely, and I'm certainly grateful for that opportunity. But it does create a sense of being left out. I can't go to, you know, a lot of the things, a lot of functions that I wish I could go to. And it's been interesting with COVID, everything is remote now. And so I'm sure that people listening here can understand what I'm saying. I've heard so many people say so many times in the last 6 months how isolated and trapped they feel at home. For me, I have felt welcomed and included because I'm on all these Zoom calls now, and I get to participate in county bar functions that I couldn't do before. I get to participate in a webinar. Whereas if I was presenting before in person, it would, I mean, I'm not making this up. It would literally, I would have to do nothing for several days before the presentation. Then I'd have to get in the car and drive to the presentation. And then I'd have to leave time to rest in between because I wouldn't be able to present after I've driven because there's been too much energy. Then I would present, rest again. And then literally if the presentation was an hour, that was, you know, a full 3-day event for me. So those are the things that are exceptionally hard for me because I always want to be able to do more than I can do, not being able to keep up, not being a part of the group, and not being included because I can't, you know, most of the time I just can't do it. Now with the coughing, of course, with the COPD, now I'm super, I see Patanisha smiling because I know we've talked about this. I rarely go out, but if I'm on a Zoom, like this morning, a good example, I was on a Zoom and I started coughing. And right away, what am I thinking? Oh my God, people are gonna think I have COVID. So I'm like, right away, I'm not contagious. Not that they're gonna catch it over Zoom anyway, but you feel like you have to explain. So the coughing, even prior to COVID, it's very, if you're coughing in front of anyone, you know, I'm always explaining, I'm not contagious, sorry about that. I try to do my inhaler in private, you know, all of those things. So those are the things for me, the stigma, the isolation, and just feeling separate from people. So if there was one thing in your journey that you would change, what would that be, Patanisha?
So I think, and I want to go really quick back to the last question, Julie, that you asked. I didn't get a chance to answer that one. One of the things that's been difficult in practice for me is the appearance, the actress, being the wonderful actress. You talked about that earlier when you went through the slides, and I have to completely agree. And, you know, listening to what Sally said about all these strikes, you know, when I walk in the room, a lot of times I'm a woman, and there's the stereotypes or the implicit bias that people have about women in the practice of law. And then I'm a woman of color. And so there's been many people who have said, and I find this to be really true, that people of color have to work 10 times harder than people who are not of color because of institutional racism and because of all of the glass ceiling and et cetera, et cetera. And so here I am working harder, but I have this invisible disability that makes me need more time to rest, and I'm struggling. And so what has been, I think, the most difficult for me is the juggling, is the balancing act. Mm-hmm. The balancing act of and I was teased for the balancing it appropriately. I used to go to court with a little pulley. It was plastic pulley. And believe it or not, a bailiff teased me about the pulley. Little did they know, it was on days where I could barely use my hands to lift a book or to lift folders, the trial binders. And so instead of me speaking up for myself, I decided not to do the pulley and carry a bag. But the extra weight is very difficult for me. And so, you know, one of the other difficult things is taking on other people's perceptions and trying to change what I know I need to accommodate myself, to make myself available and able to do my job. So I think that would be the difficult. And then your last question was if we could change anything, and I'll just roll right into that if it's okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. If there were one thing that I would change was I would actually have embraced my disability instead of waiting for others to embrace it. I think that when you find out you've been diagnosed with an invisible disability or any type of disabilities, there's sometimes the stigma, shame, the anger, all of the things that go with, you know, the same type of grief when you deal with death or dying, you go through. And I think what would have been so much easier for me would have been if I had embraced it myself, and then I think others would have embraced it as well. I think another very difficult thing for me that I would have changed was, on top of embracing it, would have been to just really educate others about my disability. I learned that most people who have fibromyalgia are type A personalities, and stress makes your fibromyalgia much more worse. So I think educating opposing counsel, or letting judges know, or drafting motions to ask for additional time, I would have done that and taken advantage of all those tools that are available. And maybe in doing so, I could have paved the way for other people who suffer from this in silence.
Thank you, Patanisha. Very well said. Sally?
I really identify with what you're saying, Patanisha, about wanting to have paved the way. And I definitely feel that now that I've been in practice a while and have achieved a certain level of success, that I now have permission to say who I am and to be a leader to others. And I do wish I'd had the courage to do that earlier in my career as well. I think we might be asking a little too much of ourselves, which is just more evidence of the fact that for those of us who struggle with invisible disabilities, we are juggling so much in our lives every day, and we really are incredibly strong people for doing that. But I would definitely educate. I think that my biggest fear was if I say I have an anxiety disorder at the time where I was bipolar, if I say I'm bipolar, people will think I'm going to commit malpractice. They're going to think I'm going to show up in a depot and start crying or freak out or God knows what. And that's not what happens. What happens to people who have, whether it's a mental illness or a physical illness, is we either self-select out and we quit the profession because we think we're not good enough, even though there's no objective evidence of that, or we turn to drugs or alcohol or other things that, and we've all seen those numbers, that aren't helping our profession either. And so I think that I took on other people's stereotypes of what mental illness looked like. And I was so scared that I would even give an inkling of that stereotype that I held it in way, way, way longer than was needed. And I'm really happy that we're all here talking about this today. So thanks again, Julianne, for putting this panel together.
Thanks, Sally. I'll just add briefly to that. As far as my experience, I definitely echo education and embracing my own limitations. I wish I had done this way earlier. The other piece that we haven't mentioned is the medical profession. I really wish that I would have been able to stand up for myself with the medical profession. I definitely, and I know Patanisha and I have talked about this, it's very, and this is not a slam on the medical profession at all. What it is that we all, just like lawyers have their own specialties, doctors have their own specialties. And when you have a unusual or not often diagnosed condition, when you go to a doctor and present with, oh, you know, I have migraines, my stomach's upset, I'm so fatigued, I hurt this, and you're a woman, you are often pushed aside, dismissed. Oh, you're just exhausted. You're just, and you're a lawyer. You're working too hard. It sounds like you're stressed out. You know, those sorts of things. And so, being the person that was, I don't want to use the word begging, but I felt like I really needed help. I knew that there was something wrong with me, but I had to do all the research. I had to go out literally on the internet. I had to figure it out on my own because I had doctors telling me that I was literally making up my symptoms. And of course, that kind of trickles down. People begin to believe it. And also, because some days you would see me and I'd look fantastic. I'd be walking, I'd be normal, I'd be doing all my activities. So that didn't make sense to people. How could one day, and I remember one doctor saying to me, that's not the way disease processes work. You can't feel good one day and the next day have this. That's stress. There's nothing else except that. I wish I had had the confidence to know what to say. And honestly, I wish, I don't want to say I wish, I debate sometimes about going back to some of these doctors and saying, hey, I want to let you know A, B, and C. And I tried that with one, did not go well. And you have to pick and choose. I have to pick and choose where I'm going to spend my energy. And so I've chosen to spend it educating new doctors. And now I'm totally different when I go to see a specialist. Put all my cards on the table, explain, this is what I know, this is what I understand, here's how my body reacts. And I mean, I'm right there advocating for myself, but it's very difficult. So I wanted to throw that piece in because I know we've all talked about the medical profession. So on that note, Alexandra, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. And Alexandra, I'd like you, if you can, to share the impact of watching a family member suffer with an invisible disability, and perhaps if you could give up ways to encourage dialogue, whether it's a family member, a friend, a colleague. The floor is yours, Alexandra. Thanks.
Thank you. And actually, it's a good note to come in on, because a lot of what Julie described has been exactly what my twin sister has gone through. To provide a little bit of context, in 2011, my twin sister was misdiagnosed with various types of migraines and given medication based on inattentive guesswork. Basically, she was told that she had chronic migraines and would just have to learn to live with it. None of those medications helped. Some of those medications landed her in the ER because they triggered the stroke-like events that she was experiencing that we were trying to understand and stop. It was an uphill battle to try to find a doctor that was willing to take a moment to look at the lab results and try to understand what was going on, evaluate responses. And even to this day, 9 years out, this past August, she still has to be that type of advocate when she's working with other medical professionals. During that time period, I felt helpless because she was my sister and I couldn't do anything to help her get better. But what was harder for me to deal with was the complete disbelief that people who knew her very well would express that she was sick. People who knew her would see her and think she wasn't sick. She can't be sick because she was still walking, she was talking, she was working normally, or they would incautiously say within my earshot, oh, she's being a hypochondriac and she's getting a lot of perks because of that. What no one saw was the amount of energy and effort it took for her to maintain some semblance of a daily life. The nights in the ER, experimenting with medications that just sometimes would go horribly wrong. That was all in the background, and but all people saw was this person that seemed to be functioning. And because of those assumptions, I got very angry and I was very shut down and just not willing to talk about it with anybody. A year later, she was properly diagnosed with late-stage neurological Lyme disease. Just as a quick summary, Lyme is a tick-borne disease that hits people differently. For her, neurologically, so debilitating migraines, fibromyalgia-like symptoms, arthritic-like symptoms, loss of energy, that inability to really focus, those sorts of symptoms. It was a relief to find out that she had this terrible disease, because at least we knew what we were dealing with, and we knew what we needed to work on, and who we needed to go to, and how to advocate for her medical needs. But at the same time, I realized at this diagnosis that what she went through was a very common story, because she had a hard time getting diagnosed accurately, and she had a hard time getting diagnosed and treated without that stigma of an invisible illness that we've been discussing, or being a woman. Going back to what's been said previously, that tendency to get dismissed and be, oh, you're just stressed. Oh, you're not really sick. It was not something I saw until she got sick. And when she got sick, even once I realized what was going on, I felt like I needed to stay silent because no one would understand. I didn't even understand what she was going through. And I'm willing to admit today, I still don't understand everything that she's going through. But I also learned that staying silent isn't the answer. And this is where I can really get to the meat of the question. For those of us who witness life-changing diagnoses and the subsequent mistreatment, whether it's from any direction to those we love, we cannot underestimate that emotional impact that it has on us individually. If anything, addressing that pain can be empowering because we can use that to turn it into something positive, turn it into more advocacy, a tool for change. But to do that, we need to acknowledge that impact and actively address it. And it seems a little counterintuitive to do the self-care because we aren't the ones that's sick. But if we can't get ourselves, I'll use myself as an example. Until I was able to understand that emotional impact and do that self-care, I was not able to talk about the experience. And I was not even able to really reach out to my sister and try to understand even more because there was that fear holding me back. So that little bit of self-care can become a platform for advocacy. So there are a lot of other tips I can give, and there's definitely some things not to say, and just a few examples are, X, Y, or Z doesn't look sick. It's just anxiety. Or in situations where all someone sees is someone just not really doing anything, it must be nice not to be doing anything all day. That's actually one that I hear a lot of with my sister when it's not, it's not really the case. So but what I want to focus on is what we can do. And I think a generally good way to encourage a dialogue is to engage in the conversation with an open mind. An open mind creates an avenue for compassion, and that's important because it sets up this mindset that there is no judgment, that we can truly have a neutral but deep conversation about invisible illnesses and disabilities. Compassion provides that acknowledgement of, I can't understand what you're going through, but I can at least try to understand what I can do for you. Which leads me to the second part, engagement. With engagement, just because we can't understand, it doesn't mean that we don't have a voice. And that can be very empowering, especially for those of us who feel that helplessness of not being able to help a friend, a loved one, heal or manage a condition. There are different ways of engaging that conversation. Sometimes it can be engaging in a panel like this one, which is why I'm so grateful that we have this panel. Thank you, Julie, for helping put this together. But it can be having a conversation. It can be writing about it. It doesn't have to be necessarily about asking the right questions, but it can be figuring out what the right questions to ask are. Example is often when people ask me about my sister, I can tell they don't know how to talk to her about it. And I use that opportunity when people try to ask those questions to change the frame of the conversation. Something like that can be very helpful. Or if for those of us who know someone, can say, do you have an opportunity, do you have some time to point me to some resources that you like? Or do you have the time and energy to sit down and have a conversation about this topic? Engagement can be in any way, as long as it's done with a sense of compassion and promoting a real dialogue. And that's how we can improve and work towards a better future in this area.
Thank you, Alexandra, so much. And our last but not least, of course, Michelle, can I ask you to unmute? Thank you.
Sure.
I'm wondering if you can share with us how you came to hire me, knowing that I had significant limitations, and how that's worked out for you.
Sure. So I met, and she was Julie, because it wasn't really in a professional setting. So I met her as Julie, not Julianne. It was on a fluke. A lawyer had given her my name. She was, of course, helping a neighbor with an employment law issue. She wanted a second set of eyes on it. And we talked on the phone a few times. And then she was appreciative of the advice, and we talked about getting together for lunch because we had just connected on the phone just to have a social lunch. And we did that. And when we had that lunch, we just started talking and realized we had a lot in common about our education, about our backgrounds, not wanting to be at big firms, our interest in employment law. And it turned out that I was in need of someone. It was good timing, and Julie expressed interest in coming to work with us, and it just seemed like a natural fit. There were a couple things that weren't perfect. I didn't really give much thought to it. She mentioned that she had some health restrictions. As both a human being and a lawyer in the area of an employment law and an employer, I didn't ask any questions about that. She said she would need to work a staggered schedule remotely. That was a little bit new for us. We were always flexible around here, but we didn't have anybody who worked at that time almost exclusively remotely. But it just seemed like it was something that we could work out, and we did. The other thing that was going to be an issue potentially was court appearances and depositions, that those might be on a case-by-case basis depending upon timing or how much work had been done the previous day or how we would handle that. And we just said that we would take things as they came up, and we've been able to work it out because Julie's very involved with her cases and her clients. Certainly there are other people who can handle those things, but that's not necessarily fair to Julianne or her goals or to her clients who want her there. So how do we work that out? Well, you have to be creative sometimes. Pre-COVID, we had some depositions that were quite a distance from her home for her, maybe not for other attorneys who would certainly drive home to and from each day, but it was going to be difficult for her. So I made this suggestion of, how would you feel if we got a hotel down there and you just stayed the night before and the night after? And that was perfect for her. And that worked out well, and she was able to be at the depositions. More recently, and this goes back to advocating for yourself and being more comfortable in terms of disclosing your conditions to opposing counsel, and also what Sally was talking about being at the stage of your career where you're willing to take that risk. We have a very difficult opposing counsel, a client that's very intertwined with Julianne and who wants her there at his depositions. And this opposing counsel, we had to disclose in more detail than I think appropriate what her medical limitations were in order for the arbitrator to say, no, Julianne is not taking advantage of the system. You, opposing counsel, need to conduct this deposition with limited hours per day and other restrictions. And I think that was a really big step for Julianne. I know it wasn't easy, but I'm thrilled with the result. So that's what we do. There's really no magic to it. We just take it day by day, the same as we do other employees' stuff. Everybody has stuff, and we're now in COVID. We're now in a pandemic and quarantine. And so every employer and every law firm, and all of you listening to us today, I'm sure you've had to go through this same exercise for your employees. And just remember that it's going to continue for your employees that have different needs because of their medical or emotional conditions, that you don't need to know what they are. You don't need to know a lot of information. You just need to know what those employees' needs and how you can help them. So for me, I'm very grateful that Julianne joined us, and I'm grateful for her for sharing. And I'm also grateful that Alexandra joined us this year through the Contra Costa Bar Association through a networking event. And I had no idea about Alexandra's twin sister until Julianne and Alexandra told me about that. So that's what comes from people sharing really important stuff. So thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Well, that concludes the portion of our presentation with the panelists. And what I would like to do now is invite you to join us for our live Q&A and hope that we can have our conversation, have the audience participate in your own experiences or own ideas for breaking down the barriers of ableism. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you at the Q&A.
All right, Julianne, Patanisha, Michelle, Sally, and Alexandra, I would like to thank you for that important and inspiring program and for sharing your experiences with us. I know that it is not easy to talk about such personal issues, and my hope is that will help give other people the support and strength to be able to do the same. I also want to thank the East County section for helping to coordinate the program, and again to Ferber Law for being our session sponsor. You are now invited to join a live Q&A discussion with the presenters immediately following the session and the announcements. Below the screen on which you're viewing the session is a link that will take you directly to the live Q&A. Materials and evaluation forms for this program can be downloaded from the session page. Just go to the Files tab above the chat. Completed evaluation forms can be sent to Ann Wolf. Your attendance certificates will be available soon. If you're a CCCBA member, they will be in your member profile on the website. If you're a non-member or you want more information on how to access your attendance certificate, just check out the FAQ tab on the main screen. So coming up after this at 6 p.m. is our evening entertainment. Let us amaze you with some Shakespeare, a bit of comedy, and even some magic. Join us in supporting our local and award-winning Cal Shakes, attorney and comic Arthur Gauss, and our own CCCBA president and magician, Oliver Greenwood. But now, please click the link below to join the live Q&A session with our presenters. I'll see you there.